Welcome to The Volley, a podcast by tennis majors, bringing you in-depth insight into tennis's latest hot topics from the tennis majors team.
I'm Simon Cambers and welcome to The Volley, the latest, newest podcast from tennis majors, which is the best place to come and find all your news, analysis, videos, anything you need to know about tennis in the world. That's where you can find it, tennismajors.com. In this second episode of our new podcast, The Volley, I'm going to be talking about French tennis. And this time, I'm not going to be the expert. I'm the host, which is new for me, but it'll be fun. So we'll see how we get on. But French tennis is in crisis, or is it? No French players in the third round at Roland-Garros this year. First time since tennis went open in 1968. And all the recriminations and the inquiries are already underway. And we'll be looking at how we got to this point. What happened? What went wrong? Did anything go wrong? Is it just end of an era? Is it just cyclical? We will delve deeper into what is going on with French tennis. I'm delighted to say that we have Cedric Rouquette with us this morning. Cedric is the director of tennismajors.com and has been a top sports journalist for 20 years. And I understand that this is his 20th Roland-Garros, so I'm expecting a lot of expertise and a lot of insight this morning.
Hello, Simon, and you should say that I am French also.
That is a good point. You are French, which is an added expertise.
And I hope my English will be good enough, and I will make the same. I will put the same word that you made on the latest podcast. We are here in the media center in Roland-Garros, so we can hear a little noise around us.
Yeah, it's nice to be here, isn't it? It's nice to get the sounds and feel of Roland-Garros, even if it's very different again this year. But at least there are fans. It does feel a little bit more back to normal. But what's not normal is what's happening to French tennis. I mean, I think from a women's perspective, it's been a while since we've had any top French women, but the men this year also have had a bit of a shocker.
Yeah, what's new in the situation is that both men and women have problem. What we call problem is performance problems. We don't have any player at the very high level now. The question asked here is, what is for a nation, for a so big tennis nation as France, what is the real problem? French Federation is still saying, and they're right, that we have a lot of very good professional players, and that's true. France is still a country that delivers a lot of players, more on the men's side than on the women. But the problem is not that one. The problem is that we are seeking Grand Slam winners on the men's side since Yannick Noah in 1983. We celebrated yesterday the 30th birthday of Noah victory, and it was very specific last year because last year we celebrated the 37th, and 37 is the time lapse between the previous winner, who was Marcel Bernard just after the war, and Yannick Noah at the middle of the 80s. So, yeah, no Grand Slam winners since almost 40 years now. That's incredible for a so powerful federation. And on the women's side, we had a little more winners, but nothing and nobody since Marion Bartoli in Wimbledon in 2013. And what is happening now is that we don't have players able to reach the second week of slams, able to take place in the top 10. We can't see really who will be able to reach finals, semi-finals, quarterfinals, just as Jo-Wilfried Tsonga, Richard Gasquet and Gael Monfils did it in the past, and that's the major problem at the moment. It all started with the women, in fact. What's happening this year already happened 2 years ago with the women. Nobody in the third round. That was a year when France won the Fed Cup, so it was easy to say that it was just an accident, but everybody felt it wasn't an accident. And the situation now on the women's tennis is that you don't have anyone in the top 50. And that's not normal. That's what Fiona Ferro said pretty clearly the other day.
What's interesting to me is that, we're talking about a generation who had a lot of very, very good players. You're talking Tsonga, Gasquet, Monfils, Gilles Simon, Nicolas Mahut, etc., on the men's side. And what was interesting when Richard Gasquet said, of course, it's the end of an era. We're 35, 36, 37. Is it just that? Is it just that a so-called, almost a golden generation of very good players, but not great players who won who didn't win Grand Slams are coming to an end? Or is there something more systematic that's not producing these players?
Yes, that's the end of an era. That's clear. Nobody could contest it. But saying that it's the end of an era, Jo-Wilfried Tsonga is forgetting some things. He forgets that he didn't win a Grand Slam. Richard Gasquet didn't win a Grand Slam. Gael Monfils didn't win a Grand Slam, and it's not necessarily normal. They say it's normal because it's the Federer, Djokovic, and Nadal era. That is true. But even in this era, you had Juan Martín del Potro, Marin Cilic, even Wawrinka here that won Grand Slam. So that was possible to find your path some year. They didn't succeed in it, and I think it's a debate that will last for a certain amount of time to understand if that's normal that one of those guys didn't win at least one slam. And it's the first part of a problem for a certain amount of people. Patrick Mouratoglou is a guy we know very well at tennis majors because he co-founded the media. He's on this line, but he's not the only one. I feel also that this generation lied to themselves a little, saying that I think Jo-Wilfried Tsonga told one day that he deserved, just like Wawrinka deserved. I'm not really sure about what that means, and I think that Stan is very aware of that also. So the first part of the problem is that normal that with this potential of player, who is incredible, that's right, France didn't win any Grand Slam. And probably it's not normal. And the reason why it's not normal is how you bring people to the high level in France is the same that leads us to notice that we lack very good players and very good potential at the moment. And so why is that? It's probably because France is still looking after the right way to bring people to the very high level. It solved the issue why a so powerful federation with this massive number of players in France isn't able to create champions where Serbia, Switzerland, Russia, Italy are creating champions. That's all the purpose.
It's very interesting to me to hear you say that, because in the UK, where I'm from, we have the same discussion, and we have it over and over again every 5-10 years. And we've been very lucky to have Andy Murray to sort of fill the gaps and paper over the cracks of what a federation does and how you should produce champions. And I was just thinking that, as a Grand Slam nation, this is part of the problem, isn't it? The pressure that brings. You have a Grand Slam at Roland-Garros the same way in the UK we have at Wimbledon, and therefore everyone thinks that we should be winning Grand Slams all the time. But it's not that easy to create a champion, and we found that in the UK, certainly. In France, what's the thinking about what the role of the French Tennis Federation should be? Is it to create elite champions, or is it to push the spread of the game in France, or is it both?
That's sort of the question, and I'm not sure it's that clear in French Federation's executive. Their role, the role they have from the minister, is to develop the tennis in France and to make tennis powerful in France. Tennis is pretty powerful in France. You have less people playing than during the 80s, 90s. Some say it's a major problem. Others say that it's normal because you have cycle. Anyway, you have around 700,000 people playing tennis. I mean, with a license, not just playing tennis behind their door. So that's enormous. So their role is not to have anyone winning Roland-Garros, but they perfectly know that if you have a new Yannick Noah winning Roland-Garros, it will change everything, of course. So I think it's the best tool they have to inspire young people. So, I mean, it's not their role, President of French Federation will be considered as a very good student if he says to his minister that nobody won Roland-Garros, but you have a lot of players, you have a powerful event, and there's no doubt about it. But they know that if you have a Jo-Wilfried Tsonga winning, not talking about Roland-Garros, but just the Australian Open, as he could do it in 2008, or even better, Roland-Garros, of course, it would be a massive driver. There's no more powerful driver than that. And any country that have a very good star in tennis could tell you the same thing. I mean, tennis in Spain with or without Nadal is not the same thing. Tennis in Serbia with or without Novak is not the same thing. So it's not their role, but it's clearly something that can be expected. To understand how that works, I think we have to make a little history. Today, French Federation and tennis coaches and tennis lovers in the country are thinking about the best way to produce champions. And the question is the relative part of the public effort with the federation or with the private effort when some player can decide that they will reach the highest level without the federation. It's totally what did Marion Bartoli, for instance. Marion Bartoli, who won Wimbledon in 2013, almost built herself with her father in the sense that they had their way to work wasn't exactly the same that what we will call the federal frame. I mean, they weren't helped at all. And most of those champions built themselves without a very powerful help of any federation. Djokovic doesn't owe a lot to his federation, Nadal as well. So the debate is what's the respective role of federation and private operators? So let's make a little history as I promised. After the World War II, sports was not that important in France. High performance was not a problem for anyone, and you can understand why. In the Olympics in 1960, France was ridiculous. And General de Gaulle, you might know him, decided it wasn't possible, and at this moment he developed a series of institutions that would be able to create champions in any sport, not necessarily tennis, but in any sport. That means that at this moment the Sports Federation started to have a mission statement that was to build champions. Regarding tennis, it happened here in Roland-Garros, where we are, with a man called Philippe Chatrier, who was the French the president of the federation. And on tennis-wise, the purpose was to win the Davis Cup again. Roland-Garros was created during the 1920s to welcome a Davis Cup final. So tennis and glory in France was mainly Davis Cup and not necessarily winning slams. So all the policy that Chatrier developed during the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s with notably Jean-Paul Lotte, you might remember him, a French Davis Cup captain, was to win Davis Cup again. That means that French Federation made a massive effort to create good players to win the Davis Cup again. What I mean is that it was a national effort, really.
That's very interesting, because I always realised that the Davis Cup was crucial and very important to French players, but could never quite explain it. So it's good to know that the history it's a little bit like Australia. They also had the same kind of thing, I think, with Davis Cup.
And that was all the purpose. So Yannick Noah, even Gilles Moreton, who was Gilles Moreton was the new French president of the federation. He was a teammate of Yannick Noah, basically. Less good, but the teammate, same generation. Henri Lecomte, Guy Forget, all those guys really are the result of this massive public effort to win the Davis Cup. And the Davis Cup was won in 1991, and that was as important as Noah's victory. Yannick Noah's staff in 1983 was federal. It was issued from the federation. So you have this frame in which the public effort, the FFT, was the one that learned how to produce champions in France. But tennis, had very strong evolution, and from the 90s and the year 2000 and 2010, tennis became very much individual sport than ever. I mean, from 25 years, every champion has to find their own path with their own structure, with their own family, with their own coaches. And France, in one hand, was a very powerful federation, able to bring a lot of professional players and pretty good professional players, and most of them pretty classy and different kind of games that is very appreciable. But was it the frame to build champions in this competitive era? Probably not, and that's exactly what we are dealing at this moment.
When people look at French tennis from outside, I think they are quite envious, they look at the number of players in the top 100, and especially on the men's side, and they sort of think, well, wow, we would love to have that. But then, as you say, some of the other nations have managed to find Grand Slam champions, and the status of being a Grand Slam champion has outweighed everything else these days. I mean, when I look at French tennis, I think of the clubs and how strong the clubs are. But listening to Gilles Moreton the other day, there seems to be a debate about what to do with the club structure and, as you said, the private, public funding or structure of tennis. And in Britain, certainly, I know we had a time where everything was funded by the LTA. And then there was a little bit of a loosening where they allowed players who wanted to go and train abroad, they would help to fund them, but they would let them go. And that sort of flexibility seemed to have helped a little bit. Not that Britain's doing particularly well, but is that something France is looking at, is maybe allowing players to go, as you say, to go and do their own thing, but to help them along the way as well?
Well, that's all the purpose of the new team. What I'm calling the new team is the new team of executive. You had an election at the beginning of the year, so Gilles Moreton was elected as president. He appointed former player Amelie as general director, a brilliant woman, and former players you might know, like Nicolas Cudet is now technical director. He's not supposed to last very long, but I mean he's in charge. And when you're listening to him, he's really in charge. He's really in it. And Paul-Henri Mathieu as an advisor for the very high level. And both of them were appointed by Arnaud Clément. And Arnaud Clément, who were the runner-up in the Australian Open in 2001, if I remember well, he was the high-level voice for Gilles Moreton during the campaign. So their purpose right now is really to let every player that would be any French player, man or woman, that would be very clear on the way he wants to reach the high level, to help him, whatever his decision is. France is very powerful by his federation, but France is powerful as well by his private academies. You have notably 3 academies in the south of France. Mouratoglou Academy is the more famous, but you have also the All-In Academy. And you have also a center in Cannes with Jean-René Lisnard. And this center is famous for having welcomed Daniil Medvedev, and that's where Gilles Savara and Medvedev met. So the point of the federation today is to say that all those paths are very legitimate. It's one thing to say it, it's another to drive it, because as any powerful federation, FFT is full of executives who want to keep their power, who have their views. So at the very moment we are talking now, Gilles Moreton is meeting Patrick, Thierry, and all the at this very moment. I don't know what will be the outcome, but it's at this very moment. So it's one thing to say it, it's another to deliver it. But clearly, what France is facing now is the fact that on the 15, 20 latest years, even the greatest potential of French tennis didn't really find their best path between the FFT, who was able to help, it was supposed to help, and that did help, and what probably themselves thought they could do with their own structure. And that deals with what I said at the very beginning. Is it normal that Gasquet, Tsonga, and Monfils didn't win a Grand Slam? If they don't, it's probably because at some moment of their career, they didn't find their path. Another problem is that they're going to retire, and that the players that might take their place, you have less of them, they have less potential, and you don't know what is their path really. The other day, Gilles Moreton said that French male tennis, still had 11 players in the top 100, which is pure reality. And when you say that, you think, okay, that's fine. Some of them will win ATP tournaments at those moments. There's no drama. There's no drama, but I looked at the stats yesterday and I found 2 things very, very worrying. The first of that is that on these 11 players, only 3 of them are less than 30. 3 of them. Hugo Humbert, Corentin Moutet and Lucas Pouille. The other information I found, just by looking at the ATP ranking, is that between the 100 position and 300 position in the ATP, you have only 1 player less than 23. And this player is Hugo Gaston. Hugo Gaston, who was at the round of 16 last year in Roland-Garros. and we still needed a wild card to play the tournament this year.
Do people in France see tennis and see Roland-Garros and expect French players to win? Is that something that they really think should be happening?
Yes, but less and less for all the reasons I mentioned. I mean, humorists when they want to talk about something that have very few probabilities, they say that we have more chance to see a French player win Roland-Garros. So that's really the mood, and it's pretty a hurting mood, including for the generation Gasquet, Tsonga, Monfils, Simon, because they heard it a lot, even though they were aware that they were top 10 players or top 20, able to win big tournaments, Masters 1000 for instance, able to reach second weeks and semifinals or Grand Slams. So they knew they were very top class players, and they were, obviously, but they were hearing that we were very weak because we never won any Grand Slam. So yes, it's an expectation, but I really felt that it was an expectation supposed to happen. For instance, if you remember the year 2013, when Jo-Wilfried Tsonga reached the semi-final, he was brilliant at that moment. It was 30 years after Noah's win, so it was symbolically pretty heavy. And Jo-Wilfried Tsonga entered on the court barely, with nobody inside, because people were drinking after the incredible first semi-final between Nadal and Djokovic. And I mean, Jo-Wilfried Tsonga didn't exist versus David Ferrer. My point is to think that as good as David Ferrer was, and he was an incredible clay player, I mean, a French player that would have lived the adventure of his life in Roland-Garros should have been able to beat Ferrer in semi-final. Nadal in final is another story. But it was the closest moment, really. And the other runner-up we had since Yannick Noah was on Lecomte in 1988, and he barely played his final. He didn't play it. He was so overwhelmed by the whole that happened around him. He had politics in his house the day before the final, just because he was in final. It's a very unprofessional way to deal with it. And so yes, they expect that, but I'm not sure that a massive part of the population believed it was possible. Whereas, when I investigate on Yannick Noah's victories in 1983, it's the contrary. People tell you that they felt he was sure of him. It was the adventure of his life. He would win it, and that he had convinced 50 million of French people of that. That's all the purpose, and I think this climate never happened since, and even close to that, it never happened.
The relationship between fans and players and Roland-Garros, it interests me, because that moment you described when Tsonga came out onto court against David Ferrer, when it was a quarter full, was shameful. I mean, it's something that I thought at the time we were here watching it, I thought would never happen in another Grand Slam nation. You know, if you had a home player in at Wimbledon or in Australia or at the US, the place would be packed. And there's that weird sort of dynamic between the fans who are there to have fun and to have something nice to eat and enjoy themselves and will turn up when they're good and ready, and the player that they're supposed to be supporting. And that relationship's very important, isn't it?
It is important, and the relationship between fans and French players, particularly here in Roland-Garros, is very, very, very specific, because if you just remember this edition, 2021, you had very brilliant moments between fans and players. I mean, Tsonga lost in the first round, but he said that he lived a marvelous moment being supported by the Langlen. You saw Benoît Paire being himself again. He lost. You saw Gael Monfils win one match thanks to the public. I mean, his press conference was all about that. I won because of the public. This game, I would have lost it last year behind closed doors. He lived a wonderful moment, something he will remember for all his life. The result is that he lost in the second round on a player ranked 105. So that's all the reality of the French tennis at the moment. We enjoy supporting them. We enjoy creating this connection between them. But when you are thinking about what's happening when one of them is able to reach the second week, the quarters, the semis. Even more, that is more, the relationship go to the other way. It means that it's the public is more in a situation where they expect the player to show them that yes, he has the level and can be the new Noah. So it's very interesting. You can make a very long investigation about that, but that's a very Frenchy way to live tennis here in Roland-Garros.
What about coaches? Because in other countries, when they've had crises like this, they've sometimes invested loads of money in overseas coaches or changed their coaching structure. French coaches have always been very well respected. They're all doing good jobs with individual players who are not French, for example. How is the sort of coaching structure seen? Because I was thinking about Gilles Simon's book, where he talks about the problem in his eyes is that over the last 15 years, the coaches in France have seen Roger Federer doing what he does, and they've decided that, that's what you should be doing. And that's not a way to develop a group of players, is it?
No, it's not a way. This story of Federer as a model from Gilles Simon is something that he suffered of because he's absolutely not his way of his style of play, and something he could physically afford. But I'm not sure that if you listen to Gael Monfils or Jo-Wilfried Tsonga, they would tell you that coaches told them to play like Roger Federer. What's common between all of them is that they feel that national coaches, I'm not thinking about French coaches, but national coaches from the French Federation had very structured way to teach tennis to people. Once again, it creates a lot of people in the top 100 and it's brilliant. But they weren't able, and I think it's probably the truth, and today in L'Equipe, Jo-Wilfried Tsonga has a very deep interview on that. At some point, what Gilles Simon says is that at some point, a good instructor is here to let the player develop himself. And if the best way to develop himself is not the academic way, you should follow him. Because if himself doesn't believe strongly in what he's doing, he won't never reach this level. So on one hand, you can say that Gilles Simon, with his physical and style of play, being number 6 in the world, as he were, beating Nadal and Federer in 2008, which he did, it could look like from a miracle. It's a miracle due to his work and to the very good instruction he had for years and years. But what Gilles Simon keeps in mind at the end of his career is that there are a lot of things that he thinks that Djokovic, Federer, and the others understood when they were 16, and when he was 16, he was impeached to develop his way. Even Tony Nadal, from his point of view, he said recently, it was a provocation, I think, but he said recently that Rafa Nadal was pretty a dirty player when he was a teenager, but he was there to develop what made him Nadal and what would let him become Nadal. And it's true that in France, at the same period, it's not the way it worked. Really not. It's not the way it worked. So I'm not sure if I'm really on your question, but you thought about, you talked about Gilles Simon's book, and Gilles Simon's book was pretty clear on that. Let the player find their path. If you look at the technique of Daniel Medvedev, who is number 2 player in the world, I mean, in France, he would have been advised to change it all when he was a teenager. Today, it's one of the things that made him very specific, and one of the talents of Gilles Servara, who was a French coach, is to let Daniel find his way with this technique. So, talking about French coaches, I often say about my profession, the media, I don't know what is it. The journalists, I don't know what it is. So the French coaches, I don't know what it is. I know that you have the French Federation on one side, and I know you have a lot of private coaches on the other side. All those people come from a pretty big tennis nation, so they are very knowledgeable and very motivated and very able to do a lot of things. The point today is that how the French Federation, who has a public mission to develop tennis in France, will they be able to work with the best private coaches you have here? I mean, it's all of the business right now.
Let's end with a note of optimism, if there is one. Clara Burel, very, very good junior. You've got some very good juniors on the boys and girls side. Is there talent to come through? Is there a way and a method for some big champions to be developed in the future?
I don't know if I will be optimistic because my answer is yes and no. Yes, Clara Burel or Elsa Jacquemot, who won the junior last year, is a very talented girl. I told you about the very bad information I took from the ATP ranking yesterday evening. I mean, on a very new generation, it's dramatic. But France has the best player aged 16 in the ATP ranking. He's just behind the 1000 place. He's called Arthur Fils. He won the orange ball last year, and he will play today in the juniors. Yes, we have talent, and I think my point is that one of the most important things today is to understand how we will let develop this kind of players who are 18, 20 maybe. Arthur Cazot, Harold Maillot. Arthur Cazot just beat Sébastien Corda in Madrid qualifications last month. It's not nothing. How those guys will be able to develop in the next 10 years. When you listen to Gilles Moreton, Nicolas Cudet and the new executives, they have big plans for the future. But if it will apply to people, to players who are maybe 14 today, the very maximum. So one of the points is how will you develop players aged between 16 and 21 at this moment? The answer is not clear yet, and I think it's an important part of the deal. But you shouldn't forget that France always had very good juniors. Always, really. And France has a very big problem into switching from the junior to the senior side. And this problem, I think, is the one we are talking about since the beginning, is how you come from being very good to being a champion and to having the mindset of a champion. A part of what we can hear for years and years is that it's too comfortable to be a high-level tennis player in France because you have structures, you have doctors, you have psychologists, and of course it's totally different from developing your own path in Serbia just out of the war, if I want to quote Novak Djokovic. Yeah. And that's one of the points. And Gilles Simon in his book wrote that, that's Gilles Simon speaking, if you listen to the French Federation, the best part of the job, we did it, French Federation, and the worst part of the job, they didn't because they were too scary to be as good as they could be. Gilles Simon says, no, it's not the case. You didn't let me develop as I wanted. So all the problem of French tennis is not to have professional players, is to let the very rare players who might have the mindset of champions develop it, even if it's outside the federal structure, because the French Federation has never been created for that, and that's what they're learning to do right now.
Well, it's a very interesting discussion and very topic, and I have a horrible feeling we may be discussing it again in the next coming few years to see whether it's working. But these things tend to take a long time.
It's very possible, but that's life.
But Cedric Rouquette, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on French tennis and what is a crisis for French tennis at the moment and what can be done in the future.
Thank you, Simon, and see you back soon in this podcast as a host or as a guest. You can do the both. It's very perfect for me. It's very perfect for me and for the Tennis Majors listener. Bye.
Thank you.